Hello, my name is Robert Shoup. I'm the director of Palmdale City Library, and we are excited to be bringing back a virtual program that we started during the COVID pandemic lockdown as a way to connect with members of our community and frankly to help build bridges during the pandemic lockdown. However, that theme is something that everyone here today in this recording, it's important to each of us for various reasons and some very common reasons. And so to start out, because it's been, we think about a year since we had an installment of this program, we want to just briefly explain the idea behind this program and why we got it started. I'll start out and then I'll turn it over to Jesse Davidson. Briefly, we have with us today, I introduced myself, have Josephine Trott here, who is the Public Services Manager from Palmdale City Library. Very happy to have Josephine on board. She joined our team back in August. Jesse is an accomplished musician, a professional musician. He also writes a column in the AV Press Showcase, weekly column there. And our special guest is Conner. Is it Cherland? Is that how you say your last name?
I say Cherland, but you can say it however you want.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go with that, and we'll hear more about and from Conner here in a few minutes. But by way of background, Jesse, just reminiscing, I guess, a little bit. We first met virtually because we had a common acquaintance, a member of our library board, and somebody that knew about you and your interest in the community and in the arts and specifically music. And it was a great opportunity to get to know each other. And we talked about this idea of a bridge builder program that we launched, and we felt good about it before, and we're glad to get it going again. So would you like to share a little bit about your recollection of why and how we got this started?
Yeah, I can do that, Robert. Thank you. I'm excited to be not only working with the Palmdale Library, but partnering with them to help spread culture and music and art throughout our community and connect people that wouldn't otherwise be connected. And that's kind of the mission I've been doing with my column, since I started it in August 2018. And I look at this program as an extension of that. And the goal here is to find a lesson in art and music or in the people that practice it, and then be able to apply that to anybody. You don't have to be a creative person or just a musician or just a songwriter or a artist or painter, whatever your medium is, to understand art or music or draw inspiration from it or valuable life lessons from it. So whether you get a nugget of wisdom from these conversations or maybe thinking about art and creativity in a way you haven't before, this whole program is designed to sort of connect people with stories and ideas and artists that they may not have understood before, and maybe help them out in some way, shape, or form. So that's the goal, I guess, in a nutshell.
Okay, great, well stated. Thank you for sharing that. And then to add on, from the library perspective, and we've talked about this before, but for our viewers out there, we see ourselves, Palmdale City Library, we see ourselves as a community gathering place and community focal point in all that we do. That's why we exist as a public library, to help bring people together, to learn more about themselves, learn about the world around them, learn about communities that they may be affiliated with already, or to discover new communities. And so this just, what you just described, Jesse, just fits a hand in glove with what we see as our mission and purpose as a public library. So, okay, well, just as I'm going to mention this as our little commercial, that please know and remember the Palmdale City Library is open 7 days a week for walk-in services. Monday through Thursday, we're open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then on Sunday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Then in addition to that, we have a very active website with many online resources available. I won't go into all those details, but check us out on our website at www.cityofpalmdale.org/library. And then you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep up. And this program will be posted on our YouTube channel at a date. We got to talk about that when we're going to post it at this point. But it'll be posted on a Saturday and then available for people to view thereafter. So that is my commercial. And now Josephine and I are going to, we'll be here listening, but we're going to turn it over to you, Jesse. So take it away.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Well, Conner, I'm excited to be talking to you again. I think at this point, we've had a few chats, with my column in the AV Press and kind of caught up about music and life stuff. For a little bit of background info for everybody, Conner and I were high school classmates, but we're never really friends, but it was kind of just, we would see each other around school and, just one of those people that becomes a familiar face in your class. And then Conner reached out to me when I was starting to get more traction with the column, and then mentioned that he was a songwriter now, and sent me some of his work and wanted me to cover some of his upcoming music releases. And with talking to Conner more, I got to know his story about that he was not always an aspiring songwriter. This was sort of an aspiration that slowly evolved and then has become a big part of his life now. And I know we've talked about this and I've interviewed you about it, but just to give the listeners a little bit of background, maybe just kind of talk about, sort of your early creative beginnings and sort of how you sort of got into songwriting and then what motivated you to do that, so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, speaking of high school and music, when High School Musical came out, I felt like it was pretty on the nose for the life I was living, where there was like this jock who secretly loved music and wanted to, let the art out, living the dreams of, his family, who is also athletes. And I went to college and started writing songs in my senior year, and took a job right out of college at Appfolio, building websites for property managers. And they asked me, how soon can you start? And I said, give me 3 weeks to make a little album. So I made a little album, and then while I was at that job, I wrote. I would work like 7 to 3, and then I would go home and write for a few hours, and then eventually I started putting out records that way, and the cycle just kind of continued for the next couple of years until I could be a full-time musician. And since then have been on pace of like 40 songs a year and writing as much as humanly possible and gigging as much as humanly possible. So it's a really weird career that I never intended, but really enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. I can speak for that myself and my own endeavors on and off the stage related to music. And I would say too, it's interesting because your approach, I feel like most artists come from it from sort of a creative, emotional side, if that's kind of something they've always wanted to do. But you have not only the background in athletics, but also the sort of science and, like you said, the technology kind of background. And hearing you talk about it, you were breaking it down in a really analytical way. I never heard any artist break it down before, and I thought it was an interesting perspective. So I forget what it was, but you had a number or a quota that you had put on how many songs you were going to write, and to determine whether or not you wanted to pursue this for a living. So talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so when I first started working my job in tech, I realized that it isn't what I wanted to do full time for the rest of my life, regardless. I knew that that wasn't my dream, but I knew that it was a great start to a career. So I made a goal, like a side quest, basically, for I was going to do 40 songs in 6 months. And if I couldn't get a good 6 songs out of 40, then my percentages would be awful and I should quit forever. But it turns out if you do anything 40 times, chances are you're going to get 6 of them right. So that's how the addiction began.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. And it is an interesting way to approach it because, I feel like so many people give themselves an unlimited time frame to pursue something, or they have a lot more free form of an idea about it. And I don't know if I've asked you this before, but what, aside from just maybe trying to set up like a routine or a regimen for yourself, why was there any other reason why you put the expectation on it at that time, as far as your own creativity and putting expectations on that process?
Yeah, so to like back up again to high school, like I started
Hmm.
journaling when I was in high school, and it was when I was 17, and I was kind of lost in in certain ways, and it wasn't until maybe my sophomore junior year of college that I started rereading journals pretty regularly, and I noticed that there was just a kind of a constant current of uh, disappointment in myself, and certain phrases like another week went by and I didn't write a song, and I didn't realize that I was trying to write a song during those times. I just lived with the disappointment of not achieving that dream. So what I ended up doing was if was setting this goal meant that I had to confront whether or not this was something I was going to ever address. It's like when I decided to like paint my house. It's like at a certain point it's just like you can talk about painting your house, or you can like like go buy the paint, start putting things down, like edging the walls. As soon as you start edging the walls, and it's like then it becomes real. So I try to make goals as real as possible so that I'm not just talking about, oh, I would love to do something sometime.
Definitely. And yeah, not even necessarily a metaphor or an analogy, but just a literal comparison. Because, when you put the first splotch of new paint on a wall, it becomes apparent how everything else is around it. And it's like, oh no, now I really need to finish this, or this is
Exactly.
going to be off. Yeah. Um, and, backtracking a little bit on my end, I was thinking about, usually I think about a theme related to whatever guest is coming on the show. The series got its name from a good friend of mine, Ian McCartor, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but he's a longtime AV resident songwriter and just world traveler, and just very interesting background of a musician and a human being. And he has a song called Bridge Builders. And, that was sort of gave me the idea of, okay, well, we could, that's the premise of the series. So how do we link these big lofty ideas and how musicians talk about creativity to everyday people? And I think the one thing that keeps coming up, like the same way you would read those journals and find those themes, the one thing I think, with looking back on our interviews and conversations we've had so far, is that to me it's the theme of adaptability and resilience, and kind of changing your course, and kind of observing sort of your path as not being like a straight line. So although you put expectations on that, it's not necessarily like you had a specific rigid goal, or if you did, you were able to kind of bend and move your path, like to get to your goal, and not just go, oh, I have to go about it this way. And I think that your journey with the types of gigs that you did and your approach to your overall songwriting career has been that way. So when you left the tech field and you're or transitioning out of it, I should say, um what was your mindset at that time? And then also, like, what were your sort of fears and anxieties? Was it just purely financial, or was it also maybe could have been like a societal thing too? Or what were your uh reservations and blocks at that time?
All of it. So obviously, the financial piece was big. While I was working tech, I was moonlighting as a musician. So I would work in the day and then I would go gig at night. And then when I decided to quit, it was because I had enough gigs at night to at least make my like based expenses. So the first thing I did was figure out like what are my like monthly expenses, and how many more gigs would I need to take on in order to cover those expenses. That was before I learned about taxes or about a lot of other things. So I realized there was a lot of surprise expenses about being a grown-up. So that was kind of the financial piece. The emotional piece is um, it's not like you quit your job and you're like, okay, now I'm a musician. All right, show me the work. It's like you're it's glorified unemployment is what it is. You just stopped working at a day job and now you spend your days doing what at home? That's the real question. Like you basically spend your time like nitpicking every little thing in the house that's dirty, cleaning it, and then stressing out about how you're not writing enough songs and that the songs you're writing aren't good enough. And then you go back to cleaning and then you go back to stressing. And so I was in this like perpetual loop. My wife would come home and I'd be like, hang out with me. So I wasn't like taking care of myself, hanging out with friends, or like I had no work-life balance. It was just a big, scared mess. That's how it started. But eventually started to dip into some routines of like, this is when I don't write all day. I think that doesn't make any sense because I need some sort of like start and end so that my brain can like rest off of that subject and say like, okay, that's just work for tomorrow. Forget about it. Um, yeah, so that's I think that covers. There's also a little bit of apart from emotional turbulence, there's a bit of the societal pressure of like you are the man, so you are the one that's supposed to be making like I know this is an antiquated idea, but there's idea of like a man being a provider.
Sure. Yeah.
That was a thing that I wasn't for uh and I had saved up money from my tech career, but that I wasn't actively providing like most men my own age. So that was a pill that I had to swallow uh still to this day.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And maybe it's not even. I don't think of it necessarily, from my perspective. I don't think of it necessarily tied to manhood, but it's more about just being a person nowadays, where it's like being able to provide for yourself. Because
Yeah.
nowadays, if you're in a relationship with your significant other, usually both people are contributing to the household, so it doesn't matter. Everybody's working. So if one half is not working as much, then you feel this discrepancy, and I totally get that. And the work-life balance thing is important because I feel like it's a excuse me, hold on a second.
Go for it.
Yeah. Speaking of antiquated, having a phone going off in your house is very antiquated, is an
Yes.
antiquated idea. But I will say, the other thing about that too, I find that when it's dry, like when it's not raining, you're in a drought, and when it rains, it pours and
Yeah.
you're flooding. And like this weekend wasn't a crazy example of it, but I had work on Friday, flying out for a gig Friday, then Saturday, Sunday had gigs, and then came home today, did a half a day at LPAC, from 8 to 1, when I got home at 4 from the gig. And then I didn't I don't want to turn down that work. And then,
Yeah.
I'm here today. And, I'm not saying that's the best routine, but you find yourselves in these situations where, you don't know when the next thing is going to arrive, like gig or opportunity. So you find yourself taking everything when it comes in, and then you can really burn yourself out that way too. And then how much are you, and you're still running into the same problem where you want to write songs, but then you're so focused on this other thing, then it's kind of like, well, wait, where does the creative element come into this?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Sorry, was there a question on that as well?
Oh no, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that or not.
No,
That's
I
okay.
just agree. That was all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to kind of talk about those things too, because it's it's when you get to a certain point, it's good to figure out like what's the most prioritizing your time, I guess, or triaging what you're doing, right? And
Yeah.
like, yeah, so that's a big element of it.
Yeah, I would say for when it comes to like the idea of like when it rains, it pours, like the the problem with work that I mean this isn't just like creative work, but work that you care about. There's a ton of people who just do work that they really care about. It's not that they're clocking in and clocking out, their brain is somewhere else while they're working. It's like the majority of the time when we're working, our brain and our heart really has to be there. Um, My wife, she was a preschool teacher at the same time that I was starting out, so we both felt very similarly spent. She much more so by the end of our work weeks, just because you have to give your full self into it, and I think that that requires some pretty strict boundaries on rest, and you have to take rest as serious as you do work,
Hmm.
and that was something that I struggled with for maybe the first 5 years entirely.
Yeah. And I feel that's, part of it's just paying your dues and part of it's just getting used to it, and it's sort of figuring out your own balance of all that too, and your own path. And getting back to that, you know, so getting into this, like you said, you had some money saved up, you're starting to work at it. And I feel like is in terms of adapting and resiliency, I think that's one of the biggest lessons that you can take from creative people, because when you're trying to do it for a living, you have to go with the flow and you have to sort of, roll with the rhythms of life in a way where if you were just working a regular job, it's like you might not experience, with set hours and things like that. And
Mm.
part of that is the mental anxiety and fatigue, and people feel that anyway, but it kind of when you find ways to manage that, doing what you're doing, I feel like there's a lot of wisdom in there. So what are some of those what are some things that you feel like have helped you alleviate that, aside from obviously rest and kind of taking care of yourself? Like when you get in those moments or those ruts, or if your mind starts to, wander a lot or get really anxious, like what are those ways that you stay grounded?
Yeah, I think one like boots on the ground answer is to really understand your financial metabolism kind of in general, because there's like a story that I'll have in my head of like, oh man, I didn't make that much money this month. Oh, I didn't make that much money this month. And then there are other months where it's like, oh, I made a lot of money this month. And so the real answer is like, well, what is like the net, income or expense of the year? Like, am I making a lot of money, or am I making no money? Am I just losing money? And what was like basically in the pandemic, what I had to do is I was working like 6 nights a week, playing these background gigs for 3 hours, and that was like, 3 hours, $300, 3 hours, $300, 3 hours, $400. Like, so it was pretty consistent work throughout the week, all year round. So my schedule was pretty consistent, and I worked really hard for that. But I was singing, like actually like singing, and like I do like a foot tambourine and a foot shaker. Like I'm full body moving. It's really tiring. I would do that for 3 hours, like 4 to 6 days a week, and that made a lot of, again, like financial stability for me. But I was dead tired all the time. Songwriting was a lot harder. Now, because of the pandemic, I was like, I don't want to get sick for the cost of $300. It's not worth it. So I switched to doing weddings and corporate events, so I'm getting paid more for performing less. And now the majority of my income, like 80% of my income, is made in a specific like 8 months of the year. So there's 4 months of the year where I'm making 20%, and then there's like the other 8 months of the year where I'm making like the big amount. And so that's kind of what I have to lean into now, is that narrative of like it's okay
Mhm.
for me to make a lot less money November through March, because the other months really do carry me. And the better I get, the more I focus on what I can control, which is improving and marketing, then the higher the odds are that more people will find me. Yeah, being more than just a word of mouth, waiting for the phone to ring kind of a guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's in a way, it's you have to look at the drummer that I work for. His name is Bobby Rock, and he's, if you can look him up, he's toured with a bunch of people, and he's the guy that I'm currently drum teching for. He turned me on to a really great concept that I never thought about it in these terms, but it's really simple and makes a ton of sense. And I'm not sure where he got it from or if he thought of it, but he introduced me to this idea called bandwidth. That if you're thinking about your brain and how much information you can handle and put out and just energy you can devote to stuff, you only have so much bandwidth. And so worrying about all that stuff that you were talking about takes a huge chunk of bandwidth, and where even if you had the physical energy to write, that your mind would still be other places, and it would not be fully in what you're trying to do. And since switching to that model, do you find that your songwriting has changed in the way you approach it and the way that you think about it and feel about it?
Definitely, I would say this is the first year that I haven't freaked out from like November through March. And like
Mhm.
the other 6 years that I've done this, those have been dark, dark, dark months, like really ready to throw in the towel, like really ready to like end it all. Not my life, but, but
Oh,
like
no, I get it. Where you're just
just the
like
career.
you're like, I could just play guitar at home and then get a regular job, and you start thinking about like other things that you could be doing with your time and not stressing about that. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been impressed. That's going to sound really vain, but I have been impressed with that shift that I've made mentally in the last year because it has freed me to write about something other than I wish I had more money, which like the main reason why I want more money is so that I don't have to feel afraid. But like, do I have to feel afraid is the question that I keep coming back to, which is a lot of the times, no, I don't have to be afraid. I could enjoy my time because it's my time to enjoy because I work the other half of the year like a madman. So, um, that's sort of what I've been leaning into. And like, again, you're catching me on a good day, so I'm not like freaking out at the moment. But like, there are days where my wife still has to talk me off of a ledge and be like, remember the narrative. These are the slow months. You will in a month wish that you had more time, and right now you wish that you had more money. And so just know that there's always going to be that, and you have to enjoy the time when you have it, and then enjoy the money when you have it. You know?
Yeah. Well, and that again, I maybe it's just with my writing background or just how my brain is wired, but when people like talk about those revelations, it's like, well, in the same way that, everything in your body is connected and all of these different aspects of life are connected, I look for the connections there. And it's like, well, in some ways, so many people are searching for like, oh, if I can only find this thing to overcome this. And it's kind of like you said, just doing it and trying to stay present and just enjoying what you have
Mhm.
and not really looking too far beyond that. Obviously, you're not just going to take every day, and have no plan for, you're going to be working on stuff, but at a certain point you have to just do the work, let go of it, and then, once you put the work in, just kind of enjoy where you're at, because then otherwise you're just totally spinning your wheels. And yeah, it's just it doesn't help anything.
No, no. And then all your songs become pretty redundant because they're all about the same concern, which is all the songs start saying the same thing, which is like, I think I'm not enough, I think I can't. And that's like cool. That's a cool vibe to get through, but there's a lot of other layers that you could be writing about that might be more fun.
Yeah, definitely. And so going back a little bit, you mentioned that your background was sort of relating to that high school musical dynamic, the jock who secretly wants to be an artist. And one thing that you had mentioned to me previously was that, you were coming from a sort of, it was volleyball, right? If I remember. Yeah. You were coming from a volleyball background. And so I feel like people who sort of have experiences at that time of their life, like in their formative years, that if you don't really think about it or examine it, sometimes that kind of shapes who you are for, like the rest of your life. I had, briefly talk getting into that a little bit for me. I had an experience like that with, I ran my first 10K in November last year. And in that
Congratulations.
same yeah, well, thanks. It was in that same time in high school, like when you were thinking about possibly getting into songwriting. I was just not an athletic kid. I just, that was just not how I was built. And anytime I would try to run or do anything like that in PE, there was always just people, saying mean things, always just, making fun of me, whatever. Just, and I built this conception in my mind that, oh, I'm just not a runner. I'm just not that. And the more I started to get into it, and when I finally did this, I'm like, why did I think for the longest time that this is not something that I could be? It wasn't even a block or something I thought about. It was just this idea I had set. And as soon as I did this, it was like, well, I can do, once you have like a little bit of achievement like that, where you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you have some success at it, and I did the whole thing. I think, the 6.2 miles, I think it was like about an hour and a half, and it was about 14 minutes a mile. And I'm like, it's not bad, it's not bad for not having, and I'm like, wait a minute. And I didn't even properly train going into it. I was like trying to do it in between working, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't stay consistent with this. And, like I'm going to come in last. It's like going to be the athletes, the regular people, all of the league of old lady 10K runners. And then I'm going to be like behind them,
Yeah.
coming in. But I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to give it my best shot. And when I did, I'm like, it just opened this whole idea about what could be possible. And I'm sure that you had that similar experience with coming from your background and then trying to transition into what you're doing now.
Yeah, it's interesting, like when you think about like what forms in us in high school. Like we won a CIF for volleyball in my sophomore year. So I was 15 years old wearing this giant gaudy ring that was like basically like this like iPod's case. Basically it was like what I was wearing around school as a 15-year-old boy,
Yeah, right.
and just like feeling so cool just like at a desk just like showing it off. And so what it turned me into was like this really arrogant thing. But I was thinking about it the other day, and what I did was I belonged to something. Like I really belonged to a group of people, and it had like, you know, when you're in a sport, there's like ways that you talk, and there's like you go to practice and you like share the same space all the time, and then you like play the game, and then you go to each other's houses and you watch the game, and you like read the stats, you like get the stats for the footage, and then you like send in the stats to the newspaper, and then you like read about yourselves in the newspaper. And it's like that's like a culture to belong to. Like it's like culty, you know?
Yeah.
And it feels good, and it felt above everything. And it felt untouchable, which is a large part of my issues as a person was like stem from that time. um so it was bad for me in that sense, but it was really wonderful to belong to something. And what I realized is like the the feeling that life that you could like belong with life, that um like during that time, everything was kind of going my way, and like friends were all around me, and we were doing the same thing, working for the same goals. And then I became an adult, and I realized that like everyone, like you might be in the same company, like I was at the same company with a lot of people, but we were all building our individual dreams and just like trying to milk a company for money so that we could live our own dreams, like it wasn't about like, oh, I really want to, let's as a group like build a ton of websites. Let's like make property managers across the world happy. Like that was not at all our
Right.
dream. It was just like, and we don't hang out after work. We don't call each other to see how we're doing. Like if someone has a breakup, it's like you don't care that much. And like that was the real thing that I missed and was looking for. And I feel like music has so much of that. Like there's when you are an artist, I'm sure this relates to other things as well. But when there's a group of people who are all after the same thing, like in my case, it's like we're looking for musical beauty. We're trying to create and find musical beauty. And if you have it in any degree, we're grateful, and we want to share. We want you to share it with us. We want to hear it, and we want to know what led you to that place. And like, I like want your stats. Like I want,
Mm.
I want your stats, and I want to write about it. I want to think about it, and then I want to talk with you about it later. And I want to try copying you and showing you what I did. And like that kind of a community has meant a lot. I don't even remember this question. I feel like
No, where you're answering it beautifully. It's just talking about breaking these. I use the example of like a time period in high school because I feel like a lot of people carry stuff from that time, but it could be from any time where it's just something happens when you're younger. You build this preconceived notion in your mind, and then it's not even, something you think about. It's just sort of like the limitations you've really established for yourself, like these hard limitations.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
there's a difference between who somebody is, who you are, who I am, and this is just how my brain works, this is just how I am. But then there's other things where you think about it and it's like, well, why is that such a rigid limitation? And I think that,
Yeah.
you becoming a songwriter is a great example of that. If you had a more narrow mindset, and obviously you had a passion for wanting to pursue this and desire to, but aside from that, that will only take you so far. Like you still had to, a lot of adapting and overcoming is taking those notions or what you think isn't possible and then challenging it. And then
Yeah.
oftentimes, you might run into hardships along the way, but usually we're way more capable of what we give ourselves credit for in so many
Yeah.
aspects.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. So I ran with that question in a totally different direction. I
Hey, that's
felt,
that's why I asked you to do this. I
but
like
yeah,
people who run with
I,
it and like talking. So there you go.
so I have adapted, and I can answer it now. Now I know what you're saying a bit more. The
Go
so
for it.
one of my big misconceptions about myself was I'm not going to be the music theory guy. I'm the guy who cares about, does it sound true? Does it feel true? Like is the lyric, like, does it sit with you well? Like that was going to be my thing. I was going to be the guy with heart, not the guy with technique. Um, and in the last year, I started taking music lessons with a guy that I admire as an artist a ton. And he did a specific album that I really really loved, and he wrote the music for it. And so I reached out through Instagram, and turns out he lives 15 minutes from my house, and we do these music lessons, and he teaches me music theory, and I'm learning all these rules that felt so. The problem with music theory is, like, when people on the outside listen to music theory, they hear it like Charlie Brown's parents. It's like "Wah, wah, 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 wah." It's like it's stuff that
Right.
doesn't matter. It has no relevance to their life. And that's how I felt about music theory for a long time. And then so I started seeing this guy, and I would ask him questions like, "Hey, when I write a vocal melody, like just the classic, like part of your world,
Yeah. Right.
like how do I figure out what other things to add to it? Like how do you know what other notes to add to like all the other instruments, And like what how do you, when you have your melody, how do you ascribe harmony?" And he was like, "That's a great question. Let's start in this book." And he like opens a book, and I'm not going to tell you the name of the book because it doesn't matter, but it's this concept of like this book has exactly what you're telling me. This book has a melody, and it's asking you to fill out the harmonies. And
Right.
there is a correct answer to all of these problems, and I'm going to start you on number 1, and we're going to work our way through. And as you go through, you're going to learn some rules, and some of those rules are going to help you sound good in the future. And that's like the kind of super practical thing that I really needed, of like, I need to know why the circle of fifths matters, like why these certain things that musicians care a ton about. They're like, "Oh yeah, this is a third away from this, and this is a fifth away from this." It's like, why would that ever matter? And him being like, "Well, let's like write a song together, and let's talk about like why these things build on each other." And we did, and we do. And it's like, now I get why it matters, but it's like when the majority of music out there uses such a simple pattern over and over and over again, why would you ever try to learn something else? And he was able to answer that question for me, which was like, "Connor, you only think it's that simple because you don't know it truly."
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of like there's tons of pop music that is actually very nuanced, and you don't
Yes.
understand. You don't know what's technically happening. And he's like, "I can tell you how it's happening and how to do that yourself." And now I'm like now I'm like this big advocate for music theory. I'm like, guys, music theory. I'm like,
Yeah.
I come home to my wife and I'm like, you won't believe this, and I'll like go on this huge rant, and she's like, I don't. She's like, I don't care. I don't. She's like, I love that you're happy,
I
but I
don't
don't
care
care.
what a dominant seventh chord is.
Yeah,
That's
she's like,
nice, but can we
yeah,
talk about something else,
yeah,
please?
yeah. She's like, I
Yeah.
don't care. But like all my other musician friends do care, and that's like a thing. I never thought that I'd be that guy.
Well, and it's interesting because I've changed my perspective on that too, because I didn't when I grew up playing music, it was with my friends in a garage and we were playing, hard rock and heavy metal and I still love that stuff. And I was not that person. And I think from my own bias in the past and other people I know who come from that background, and not just that background, but like just I had music lessons too, and I learned the core of it, and I learned how to compose chords and how if you change in the notes in a different chord, the qualities that will happen. Like if you raise well, not to get too music theory into this, but if you have a chord is mostly without adding a bunch of other notes to it, it starts with 3 notes and they call that a triad. And so it's the root note. So that's your initial note that you're playing. And then you add 2 notes, usually in higher intervals on top of that. And then if you raise or lower those intervals, it might sound like a happy chord or a sad chord or a mysterious chord. And those are your major chords, minor chords, diminished chords. There's all sorts of names for them. And I learned enough to where I got by. And then I was like, all right, I don't want to go any further with this, because I was the same thing. I don't want to be. I thought that learning those things would mean that I had to wear a lab coat and go, well, this isn't actually correct. And I look at them now like tools in a toolbox, or the same way that just because you read a book with words that you don't necessarily understand or haven't heard before, it doesn't mean that like just because you know those words that you can throw them in at any point in a conversation. I think it's about your personality and your heart, and the context and how you phrase things is uniquely you. And if you know the rules, like if you know you're supposed to be going 65 miles an hour on a street, but you like going 75 or 80 when nobody's around, then you're kind of you're breaking the rules. And just as an example, if you know you shouldn't jaywalk across the street and you decide to do anyway, and and you don't get a ticket for it, then you did that. And I'm not advocating breaking real laws, but just in a musical context, maybe it's not the most appropriate thing, or oh, you shouldn't throw that in there, but you do, and everybody goes, whoa, what's that? That's interesting.
Yeah.
If you know what those rules are, you can mess with them. And if you have the desire to do that, some people don't have the desire to do that, and they want to be as formulaic as possible, or they want to have something that, what is the most earwormy, commercial thing I can do, and you go, okay, or let's make this 80% commercial and 20% let's add in a couple things to make this kind of, exotic or interesting sounding. And it really is, it leaves you the tools to do what you want to do. And so I think, yeah, that's another preconception of the idea of music theory and all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And it's just interesting. Yeah. I feel like with what we're trying to do, you're almost forced to examine yourself a lot of the times and be very analytical, whether you want to be or not, with like thinking about how you can improve your craft, how you can, become a better songwriter, how you can get more people to find out about your music. And yeah, I think that because of that, it almost you go down avenues of thought that you wouldn't necessarily find before, or you probably wouldn't have challenged yourself maybe as much if you weren't in this field. I don't know. Do you feel that way? Maybe with like challenging these sort of ideas or thinking about things?
Yeah, I think the job that I have forces me to re-examine myself and force myself to change pretty regularly. I don't have the benefit of, job security or anything like that. There will be someone in the next couple years who starts taking work from me. That stuff already happens, where there's like a gig I used to get and now I don't get it. Why? I don't know, because someone cute and younger has is like playing the gig. And I think that that's fair. And so the thing is, like, you either get more cute, which is, as you age, not going to happen, or or you continue to make things that are like more and more beautiful, make things that are more and more undeniable, and people are like, oh, this isn't about who's, because that's a big piece when you get started in your 20s. It's like, oh, cute and sings well on a stage gets people to the seats, you know? Everybody enjoys that kind of a vibe. As you start to get into your 30s, you know, people, it's a little less cute just in general, and it's like, if you're bad, let's let's not go to that show, you know, because it's not good and it's not cute. So
Yeah,
that's the thing that my inner dialogue continues to push with, is like, you know, get continue to get better, continue to say more, continue to mean more, so that you're actually drawing at people's hearts. You're not just like um tickling their fancy in a normal Friday night kind of a way.
absolutely. Yeah, I find some of the old masters that you can draw inspiration from are really the key with that. Like watching any of the stuff that Johnny Cash did later in his life, you know, certainly not a heartthrob by any means, but so real and genuine. And picking up a young audience when he did those records with Rick Rubin, you
Mm,
know, and there were these, you know, goth kids and metal and punk kids that, because Rick Rubin already had that sort of fan base, or was, you know, had already, you know, made records that brought those people into his world, or, you know, uh, elevated certain artists, that he did that with Johnny Cash and did it on their first record with just him alone with an acoustic guitar and
yeah.
nothing else. And then all these people went, whoa, this guy has a lot to say.
Yeah.
And, or, an odd one for me is Tom Jones, who, you know, speaking of heartthrob, in his heyday in the 60s and 70s, was like this charismatic, good looking guy who could sing and dance. And then you watch some of the concerts he's done, like, you know, in the last 10-15 years, and he comes out in a suit and he's got the salt and pepper goatee and he looks like a wily veteran. And then he sings some song, like he's got a great band, sings an amazing version of either one of his old songs that he's updated to a new version, or does a cover version, like, oh, here, this is a song somebody wrote, here's my version of it.
Mm,
And totally, like, you watch him and it's like, wow, this is a playbook of like, this is how you age gracefully. And it's like, he's
yeah.
not trying to be that guy anymore. He's trying to live in the moment, and like, I can still sing, I can still perform, this is what I do. And there's so many other examples, but those are two in my mind where I'm like, if you could do that in your own way, and you don't have to be that famous or successful, but if you can do that in your own way, you will maintain, you know, your audience. And I feel like that also translates to life too. If you can live in the moment and be grateful for what you have, like we were talking about earlier, I think you will radiate a way better energy that will attract more of what you want into your life as you get older, and as opposed to just being stuck in a certain time period.
Yeah, I will say, like, one of the biggest things that I've been thinking about this year is certain. I've just been addressing certain limiting beliefs,
Hmm.
like people won't enjoy this, or you know, just things that your brain says while you perform. And I think one of the things that I've believed for a very long time is that I need to be different in order for people to connect with me.
Hmm.
Meaning that like who I am does not connect with the general public. And I've started to really change that because I think the more myself I can be, the more and this has to do with presence. This has to be with like being grateful for who you are, but being like, I'm gonna be the most myself I possibly can be, and I'm not going to pretend to be something else. And that actually has like the more I focus on that, the better the outcomes are during my performances, I've realized.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's a great way to approach it and a great way to tackle any sort of limiting beliefs. Well, one last question I have to wrap it up here before we head out. So I know that you mentioned uh with talking about earlier the sort of X amount of songs and X amount of time sort of approach that you took. But now that you've been writing consistently for so long and you've been in this world for so long, in general, what are some exercises that you found that like let me rephrase it a little bit. If someone has creative aspirations and they want to express themselves, but they feel limited by that, what are some exercises or ways that you can start to break out of those habits and sort of get those creative ideas flowing, or to get the ball rolling, so to speak?
Yeah, I would. Um, I'm actually teaching songwriting to a 14-year-old boy in Orange County who's never written a song before. But
Nice.
we wrote his first song together last week. So like my advice when you're first starting out, like think about if you're drawing something, you don't like you could just pick up a pencil and just like, scribble whatever you want, but typically people will start by tracing. So they'll like find something that they already like, they'll put transparent paper over it, and then they'll trace over it so that they get the feeling of those lines into their body. And it's how do I get the feeling of this movement inside of my body? So what I did when I started writing songs was I would take other people's songs like like Casimir Polanski Day by Sufjan Stevens, and it's like da da dun 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 dun, and I would take that melody and I would take those chords, and then I would just write my own lyrics on top of it, like Jesse Hand with the Davidson and the 2 a.m. and I would just write whatever to fill those exact syllables in that space, and I would give no other. It would be really tight parameters. Um, and eventually that got a little boring and I started changing up the melody a little bit. And then that got a little boring, so I started changing up the chords a little bit. Now the songs are starting to sound a little like their own. And that's the more you change, the more you eventually become your own. But it's not bad to just straight up rip someone else's song to start, because that's how you start.
Yeah, and I really do find that when I've been stuck in anything, the best part about that exercise to me, or would be for me, is literally just to do it. Because sometimes the what you're talking about, it's not going to be good enough, and it's like, well, just get it out there, and then if you really like it, you'll find that like there's this spark, and then you just want to keep doing it, or you want to keep exploring this because this is interesting. And so yeah, that's a great way to just, let's not think about it too much. You don't even have to be totally original, just come up with this one piece, just change this one piece, so then it becomes a way less daunting task. You're just taking
Mhm.
it and condensing it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. Connor, I think this has been a great conversation about not only your creative approach, but finding things that hopefully other people can take some inspiration from. And real quick before we go, please plug and promote anything. Where can they find you on social media, streaming, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'd love to promote the Palmdale Library. But before we do anything, that was how I back when you had to buy individual songs, I would go to the library, download CDs onto my laptop and onto my iPod, and that's how I used to get free music as a high school boy. So that's if you want to get into music, you don't have to do that anymore. You have the internet, but I owe a lot to the library.
Yeah.
Um, you can follow me, and I put out an album in October called Call Waiting. You can find me anywhere on the internet. Conner Cherland, ConnerCherland.
Cool. And then I will make sure that Josephine gets links to all that. So hopefully you'll be able to find that in the description below on YouTube. Connor, thanks again so much for helping to contribute to this series. And it was a pleasure talking to you today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again too. And thank you everybody for tuning into this week's Bridge Builders. And we'll be back with more exciting guests and interesting conversation. And take care and see you next time.